Welcome back, everyone, to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. We are talking about Naviance, and joining me for that conversation is my colleague, Mary Sue Youn. She happens to be a former admissions officer at both Barnard and Whittier colleges. Hi, Mary Sue.
Hi, Beth.
Happy to have you on the show today. I feel like it's been a while since
Yeah,
we did a segment. So,
yeah.
and we're talking Naviance, and our listeners don't know this, or our viewers don't know this, but you are the Naviance queen in our office. So you are the perfect guest for this. And I'm going to start with something super basic, and that is, what is Naviance?
Right. So Naviance is a tool that's used by a number of high schools, not all high schools, but a lot of high schools, where it's a way to kind of manage information about colleges that then gets shared with high school students. So the way that a lot of high schools use it is they use it to kind of share anonymous past data of their alums from the high school and sort of where they went off to college, and also sometimes information about things like upcoming high school visits by college reps. So it's kind of a college counseling communication tool within the high schools, and can be used in a lot of different ways by families.
Yeah. So you did mention it in passing, but is this something that every school offers or no?
No, there are a couple competitors. There's one called Score, there's one called Maya Learning. So there might be something else in your particular high school, but they all serve kind of the same function. It's to provide information about colleges to the high school students, and also to provide a database for the high schools of sort of past acceptances and kind of where their students went on to college.
Yes, the Scattergrams function on Naviance is my favorite, and we'll probably
Mhm.
talk about that in a few. But one quick thing that I did want to mention to our listeners is that if you're curious if your school offers Naviance, they may, and you may not be aware of it because your student may not yet be at that age or at that grade where they introduce Naviance.
Mhm.
So quickest way to find out is check with your school counseling office.
Yep.
Or even probably go on to the website, because I know counselors are incredibly busy right now. Probably the busiest they will be all
Mhm.
year will be right now in the fall, all the way through until school break. It might be they might give information about the Naviance system if they have it on their guidance website. So
Mhm.
just FYI. Um,
Yep.
so we know already that not all schools have it, but for the schools that do have it, do they
Mhm.
all use it the same way, or how is that kind of rollout?
No, they don't all use it the same way. And so that can be a confusing thing. I know when I'm talking to our students in a variety of settings in which we work with students, um, I can't sort of make a generality of everybody does it this way. You do have to go back and check with your school counselor as to how they're particularly using it. But I think some common ways to use it would be to use it for managing the information of students and sort of how they're applying. Perhaps the transcript request, perhaps teacher recommendation requests might be done through Naviance. There is a database in Naviance of all colleges, and so you can kind of look up information about the college. You can kind of see, whether that, in some cases, whether that college or university is coming to visit your high school. So it can be a wealth of information, but different high schools turn on different features of it. So some choose not to share as much data or as much information. Others sort of choose to share everything. So yes,
Yeah.
your mileage may vary.
Right. Okay. And it's a good point. And actually, I'm bringing it up again because I know for me it's such a useful tool. Can we talk a minute about scattergrams? Because
Yes,
one thing that I have noticed is that not all schools turn them on, which
yes,
blows my mind. But anyway, but
yes.
tell us a little more about the scattergrams feature.
Yeah, so the scattergrams feature is just a visual representation of um, what past history has been for that high school with a particular college or university. One of the things that I feel like I often have to explain to families in this process is really thinking about um, how is that information entered into the
Yes.
system. So many high schools choose to allow students to self-report their information. So at sort of the spring of the senior year, when the student has gotten all of their decisions, those acceptances, waitlists, and denies, they sort of send reminders from the high school counseling office, go back and update your Naviance, tell us where you got in, tell us where you didn't. Now, I have a student who's in, my own child who is in college. I have a younger one who's still in high school. I'm not always convinced that teenagers have that level of follow through.
Yes.
So sometimes the Naviance data can be a little bit skewed in that way, and that, students might put in their acceptances, but they may not put in their denies, even though the information is blinded and the student's actual name is not on that. But what it is, it's a visual representation. It'll show sort of the average GPA, average SATs put out on dots on a scatter plot. And you can kind of see the trend line for a particular college or university. I always find what's so fascinating is that when you look at our highly selective colleges and universities, the data gets really muddled, even for students who have very strong numbers. And that's because of the selectivity of those colleges, where you might see some more predictable universities where the sort of standard of what they're looking for is pretty clear from those scatter plots. So it can be useful information, but you do want to make sure you're interpreting it the right way.
Right, and then I guess the other thing that I'm always noting when we're looking at scattergrams, when I'm looking at them with students, is yes, when you see the outlier, that's exactly what they are. They're an outlier. So when someone got into a school with maybe particularly low test scores or a GPA that's not really lined up with everyone else's, there's probably something else going on there. Often, and not to knock athletes, because there are many talented recruited athletes, but sometimes it's a recruited athlete. It could be a development case. There are a lot of reasons for those outliers. The key when you're looking at these as a parent, as a student, is they're outliers. That means there is no predictability there with the outliers. And so you need to factor that in when you are, when you're looking at this. In terms of using it effectively, what's advice that you have for students when they get access to Naviance?
Right. So if you are in a high school where they give you access to Naviance on the earlier side, so my children's high school gives access in 9th grade. Some do 9th or 10th grade. Some say, yeah, we're not turning that on until 11th grade for you. But I think it's good to just kind of poke around and use the information and find out kind of what there seems to be as trends for your high school, for certain colleges and universities. As I mentioned, it's also connected to a full database. And so beyond the information from the high school, there's information that the colleges themselves publish on there. So if you want to do a search or you want to look for schools that have certain programs, you can use Naviance to do some of that college searching there. So it can be helpful in that way. As you get a little more, as a student gets a little bit more into the application process, you definitely want to connect with the school counselor to find out how Naviance is used within your particular high school. So if they have, for example, the teacher recommendations feature of Naviance turned on, you want to make sure that you know how to do that. So when you do request those teacher recommendations, that you're putting the information in correctly in Naviance so that those recommendations are not only uploaded by your teachers, but that it is matched to your common applications. There's a way that the Naviance database or Naviance account and the common application account can be coordinated and talk to each other. And so that is often the way that students turn in, get their teacher recommendations turned in. Some high schools also use it for the transcript request section. So that might be also the way to request your transcript and your school counselor's recommendations. You want to know what the school's policies and procedures are about that. I would say, familiarize yourself early so it's not feeling like, oh no, it's October 31st. I have a November 1st deadline and I didn't put in the request that I was supposed to put in. And now they're going to be late to the colleges, which could be an issue for some schools. So you do want to familiarize yourself with that. But I also tell families, look at the scatter plots, but don't consider them to be, the absolute truth and the only piece of data that you look at.
True.
It can be one of many pieces of data that you look at when you're evaluating different colleges for academic and personal fit. And it can show you certainly trends, but it is one piece of data, not every piece of data.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really good point. And I do want to underscore what you just said. You cannot leave this to the last minute. You're putting Naviance to the side. Every single school out there has a process by which they get everyone's pieces out to the colleges, and you need to understand your school's process. And if you are a senior and you are listening to this podcast right now and you don't know your school's process, that is your homework. And if it's during the week, you need to go do that today. And if it's the weekend, you need to do that on Monday, because a lot of schools will have, you need to request your transcripts a couple of weeks in advance, sometimes as much as a month, maybe even a little bit more. There may be a fee associated with that transcript request. It is not going to work if you are used to sailing into your class at the very last minute and handing in an assignment or getting an extension. That's not going to work with this college process. So on behalf of your school counselors, on behalf of your parents, on behalf of you, I am begging you to understand how this works at your school and figure it out before you need to. Actually, I mentioned parents. Is this something that parents can access and use?
In most cases, yes. So schools often give parents access as well. There may be a separate parent, depending on how it's set up, maybe a separate parent account, and they may just say, use your student's account and look at it with your student. But yes, again, it can be used to do that initial college research, to find out more about colleges, to really kind of dive into the data. I find that many parents, particularly if you are thinking of notions of colleges and their selectivity from 25, 30 years ago, when maybe you went to college, are surprised when they look in Naviance as to how selective, and you can see a representation of a student with a phenomenal GPA and great test scores who didn't get into some schools that perhaps you had expected would be less selective than they are now. So I think it's good as a parent to educate yourself on the current state of admissions and the current selectivity of some of the schools that your student might be considering.
Yes. Obviously, if you're listening to us today, you've heard this message again and again and again. But to your point, Mary Sue, Naviance can be a great place to help you kind of reset your thinking when it comes to how selective or not some individual schools are. Mary Sue, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your infinite Naviance wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Beth, for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So thank you, Mary Sue. Thanks to all my guests today. It's been fun to be back and hosting the podcast, and I will be back quite a bit in October. However, next week, Sally is hosting. She's going to be talking about majors, how to think about a major, selecting a major, whether or not it's okay to apply undecided, what that looks like, and also the CSS profile. Do not forget, I talk about it every time I host the show, perhaps my colleagues do as well, but if you like this show, if you find it helpful, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That moves us up and helps other people find us so that they can listen to us as well. So we would really appreciate it if you would do that. If you have a question, you can send it to us on Facebook, on Instagram. We're at collegecoachbh. You could email us, gettingin.voiceamerica@gmail.com. And you could also sign up for our blog at blog.getintocollege.com. And don't forget that we are here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Pacific.